Dr. Chuck the Science Schmuck.
Synchronize. Well, look at all this. This actually smells delicious. What is with all this greenery and spices and various liquids? The answer is, I'm doing a cooking segment. And this is where I'll be cooking it. Because cooking is itself a variety of science, and I'm a schmuck who does science, but I was also going to do this anyway, so I figured why not film it. What am I making? Pickles. Pickles is what I'm making. I make pickles periodically sometimes, so I figured why not share my pickle making process with you, whoever you may be. Now, first of all, what is a pickle? That's a question that a lot of people surprisingly don't know the answer to, because you go to the store, you see them in jars, it's like, oh, what are these? The answer is these. Okay, I have to control myself because this is about to make me laugh because of its shape. But this is highbrow on this channel, and I think I'm going to put it down. I think this is supposed to be family friendly, so I'm not going to make the 1,000 jokes that are running through my head about cucumbers. That's what these are. Not zucchinis. Zucchinis can be processed into pickles. I've done it before. It just makes a different kind of pickle. These are cucumbers. Cucumbers are a fruit which grows on a vine, related to zucchinis, but actually more closely related to watermelons. You can think of a watermelon as a large cucumber that's secretly communist, because he looks like a normal cucumber on the outside, but he's red in the middle. These get turned into pickles. That's what a pickle is a processed cucumber. A cucumber that has been preserved in acid and salt specifically. I have additional other vegetables for the spices. So the first thing to do, I think, is to cut them up. Right? Am I back? Am I back? Am I back? Cameraman, am I back? Oh, I don't have a cameraman. I hope. Yes, cutting them up is the first step. Because they will be going into these jars. So this is a matter of poor planning. The planning being, I don't know how many of these will fit into these 4 jars. If I need a 5th or 6th jar, cutting them up and sizing them to the jars will be useful. You can get bigger jars. These are ordinary mason jars. You get them at Walmart in a big pack. There actually is a canning section in most Walmarts. So you just go get yourself some cans. Oh, this sure feels weird. So, look closer. You'll notice that I have covered the science table in this nice tablecloth so that I don't get the science into the other science. Science you eat usually is separate. Well, I'm one to say this. Science you eat should usually be separated from science you don't eat. I've also got this knife for cutting, which is an ordinary knife. I did make an epoxy knife, but it would not work for this situation. Almost lost my ear. So, the question is, how do you want to cut a cucumber? The main problem being, you can't just cut them straight because they won't fit properly into the jar. So you want to size them up to be about the right height, because you got to remember, once you add spices and stuff, you get like a centimeter or 2 of sediment. So we want to cut the cucumbers about here. I say, well, aren't you wasting half the cucumber? Nope, because I'm going to do multiple cuts. So at the first, now there are methods for cutting, but do recall, I'm a schmuck, not a chef. I don't know what I'm doing. Most of the food I eat is largely considered inedible for humans. However, I'm relatively knife-proof. So as you can see, cross-section of a cucumber, green flesh, scent like snakes. Supposedly, when I was a kid, people would tell me that water moccasins smell like cucumbers, and I lived next to a pond that always smelled like cucumbers, so I was always terrified they were snakes. Even though it's Connecticut, where I was living at the time, there's no water moccasins in Connecticut. They were copperheads. But it's a nice, pleasant fruit. So, yes, it is a fruit. Fruit is the fleshy part of a substance that contains the seeds. A cucumber is technically, therefore, a fruit. That's why we cover the science table, so that they don't touch the science. Now what do we do with the top? Well, first of all, That's a cucumber. One. First thing I've eaten in one of these segments that didn't taste terrible. Second, first vegetable I've eaten in a long time that didn't come from behind the highway. Don't want to choke on that. The top, I'm going to cut into these so that you get your, sort of flat spears, but also a few chips. Okay, so if it's about 1 cucumber per jar, I have 6 of these, so I'm going to need additional jars. But I'm just going to keep cutting until my jars are all full. I can always get more jars. I have a lot of these because it's also what I put my alcohol in. I'm going to say, that's an older video. I make my own alcohol because alcohol is ridiculously expensive when you have to pay taxes on it. Okay, cucumbers are in the jars. Kind of sad to see them. They were nice and grown, but there's no point in letting them go to waste and rotting away just because they were beautiful once. They'll be beautiful pickles and preserved for all eternity in acid. Now for the other ingredients. One, I wanted to add, this is going to sound weird, because I'm drunk off cucumbers right now. So I ate like 2 slices, and I can't metabolize cucumbers for some reason. I can't, I'm joking. Cabbage. I wanted to add cabbage. So I was at Wegmans, which I call the Weggymans for obvious reasons, because it's time for Weggies. So I was at Wegmans, and I thought, I'd like to put some cabbage in here. So I go to the cabbage section, and there's cabbage. And I'm like, that's too big. I don't need a cabbage that big. That's like a $5 cabbage. I'm not going to eat all of that. But they had these tiny cabbages. Look at that. It's so little. Like, that's a tiny little cabbage. So they had this big thing of these tiny little cabbages. So I figured, I'm going to cut up some of these tiny cabbages and give them to the pickle jars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so this requires some math. I got the wrong number for those 6 jars because I intended to have only 4 jars. So it's 3, 3, and then 2. So what I'm going to do is, instead of actually doing the math to figure out what the best optimal situation is, I'm going to take the 2 biggest and put them in 1 jar, and take the others and allocate 3 to each. This is the smallest cabbage I've ever seen. It's so little. Like, boop. I don't have extra. That's really good. Okay, the next ingredient I'm going to add is a yin, an onion. Now, I find that the red onions are the tastiest onions despite their communist leanings. So I've chosen these. They're slightly more expensive than the other onions, but they're better, spicier, hottier. Hottier? Aha, a peeled onion. Ooh, my fingers are all spicy. And turning purple? That's weird, that's never happened before. I think it might be the juice of these tiny cabbages changes colors in response to things. Oh well. Red onions are famous for making people cry. However, I am immune to sadness, so I don't really have that problem. Each one of these then gets... The pickles are oriented... Oh no! The pickles are oriented poorly in this jar. I probably should have taken more care for maximum package. But oh well. It's a wad of onion. The rest of the onion will be saved for future use in different food. Now here is a point of diversion. In that some of these jars will be getting different pickles than other jars. Why do my eyes feel funny? So that's what all those are. Hot peppers. Yes, I'm making spicy pickles. So the least packed jars have space for peppers. The most packed jars do not. So the least packed jars will become... I have to be careful because the tablecloth is over. So these aren't actually on the table entirely. Okay. So these are the least packed jars that have space for peppers. And those are the most packed jars that are as they are those are not getting any additional changes until the spice adding step. Now I encounter a problem in that these are very hot peppers. So what have I got? I got some jalapenos, which are rotting, but that's fine, I'll cut the rot out. Some serranos, and some habaneros. They smell real good. However, they're very spicy, supposedly, which creates the issue of I technically need gloves to handle those, but I don't have any gloves. So I'm just going to get the spicy hands, I guess, which is unfortunate. So let's start with the jalapenos, because they need the most consideration. This knife is a bit of a blunt instrument, figuratively and literally. A little knife, a paring knife, to surgically remove, for compost, the blemishes. Okay, so the jalapenos have been sliced into circles. Now there were two types of jalapenos in the same tray. One was mild for Tex-Mex, and one was super hot wear gloves. Okay. In terms of spiciness, I'd say moderate. It's definitely there. I live in upstate New York, so I don't have a high spice tolerance. I'd say it's a pretty nice jalapeno. Flavor is a little lacking. These are kind of late in the season. Jalapenos I prefer because they have a really nice flavor. So I will distribute the jalapeno pieces into the jars with the cucumbers and the onions. Next thing I want to add is these serranos, which according to the little sign, were very spicy, and they will be sliced long ways. Now, yes, you could grind these into pulp and make a kind of spicy pepper relish, but in this case, it comes down to a question of, do I want their flavor to be percolated as like a soup, or do I want the possibility that somebody could remove the peppers and use them for a different purpose? You know, the fully pickled Peter Piper picked a peck of these. The fully pickled pepper does have culinary uses. You can either eat it as is, or you can grind that up and use that. It's a little bit less spicy and a little more vinegary, and use that for your, like a, I don't know, maybe a chili? Or not exactly a salsa. Like, salsa is meant to be fresh. But something roasted, like a sauce. Like, yeah, a nice sauce with pickled peppers. Maybe on hot dogs, you take, because these will retain roughly their form, you take like one of these and you drop it next to, you drop 2 or 3 of them next to a hot dog on a bun after they're pickled. I think that would be good. So, take those and feed them in. It does make me wonder, are serrano peppers spicy? Let's try a piece. Well, okay then. That's very interesting. The jalapeno was almost immediately spicy, followed by the kind of flavor of the jalapeno. These hit with like a certain fruitiness, like a little, oh, that's pleasant. And then you get this sudden sharp boom of spice. These actually are not as spicy as the jalapenos, just not in general, just in this case. But it's a longer flavor. I mean, in a technical sense, the substance that causes the spiciness, which is capsaicin, is always the same. It's just in different quantities with different, piece of onion. I'm going to eat that. Now going to the part I'm kind of dreading. Not the eating the onion. I like onions. These are habaneros. Now, you may be saying, habanero is not that spicy. It's not the spiciest pepper in the world. It's like, no, of course not. There are some things to note, though. They are very spicy. This is probably the most common spicy, like higher level pepper you can get. It's like the lowest level of the super high levels, but it's at a level where habaneros are about as hot as an ordinary schmuck like me can get without going to a specialty store. They also have a unique flavor. Now, I'm not a huge fan of that flavor. To me, it tastes kind of... Have you ever had habaneros? They have this flavor. Every pepper has a flavor. And it's a little bit like, it's kind of plasticky almost, which is something some people like. I just think of it as plasticky, so I'm not a huge fan of it, but I will use them regardless. The other interesting trivia about these that I think you might be interested in is that if you have a bearded dragon, These make a great food for them. You say you're going to feed your pets a very spicy pepper. Well, that's the interesting thing about hot peppers. Like I said, capsaicin. Capsaicin is the substance in peppers that makes them spicy. Capsaicin interacts with a cellular receptor in mammalian tissues that is related to the sensation of heat. It's essentially triggering a receptor that would normally activate when you are burning to say, it opens up the receptor and says, oh, hot, hot. So it's making you think that there's actual physical heat when there's not. That receptor is unique to mammals. Peppers evolved in such a way so that these would be on a plant, mammals would eat these and digest the seeds and ruin it. But birds can eat this and distribute the seeds in their droppings without chewing them and distribute the plant. That's kind of where peppers came from. So only mammals are affected by the spiciness. Bearded dragons are a reptile. Any reptile, iguanas, any type of bird. Birds are not a reptile, but descended from them sort of closely. They don't sense the spiciness at all. I was very surprised back when my bearded dragon was alive many years ago. I was cutting a pepper. I dropped some on the ground while he was walking by, because I let him free range throughout the building. And he just stopped and then ate it. I'm like, oh yeah, you're a lizard. It doesn't affect them. They like really bright colored, flavorful food. These are bright colored and flavorful. So a bearded dragon can eat this and he won't even notice that it's spicy. It just tastes good to them. And they really like the color. So it's a great food for them. Do not give it to a mammal. So not to a dog, not to a cat, not to a hamster, rats, anything with fur. And anything hairless that would normally have fur, like those weird cats. These will give you the spicy hands like there's no tomorrow. So I am going to try to be a little more careful. I also would like to reserve the seeds from these so that I can grow my own habanero trees in my underground garden. I do question if the habanero is actually that spicy in this case, because the spice is variable. I'm not going to eat the whole pepper, but... ooh, very fresh. Kind of an undernote of like a bell pepper. And then like the serrano, it comes in later with its main flavor, but also the spiciness. And here's the unfortunate aspect. The true amount of spice in a pepper is in the ribs, which is what the seeds grow on. So by not using that, I'm coming to realize that actually wastes a lot of the spicy. That's usually where the capsaicin is located. It's less in the actual wall of the pepper and more in its internal rib structure. I want thin little pieces. These, I highly doubt anyone is going to go through the bottle and eat these. And I want high diffusion. Get that shoved in one of these. Get spice on both my hands. Keep me awake at night. That way I can be more productive. I did once think about the idea of making an energy drink that's really just ground peppers, because that will wake you up. The problem being, it will also distract you from whatever it is you're doing by the extreme pain. I think 2 habaneros per container, along with all the other peppers, should be adequate. Ooh, right in the face. You know, you want to avoid getting this in your eyeballs. Now you may be saying, you absolutely, radioactively contaminated and now spicily contaminated schmuck. You just handled all those peppers without gloves. Everyone knows you're supposed to handle habaneros with gloves. I say, I don't have gloves. But I now want to do a mini experiment where I try to undo the spicy hands. It hasn't started yet, except in where I cut my finger. I can feel it moving, but how do I get the spicy out? Now, something you'll notice about a lot of people when they drink peppers or hot sauce, they then go and they drink milk. Why milk? The answer is because capsaicin, which is the spicy ingredient in these, is hydrophobic. It's an oil. Milk contains fat, which dissolves the oil and elutes it away. So you also might be wondering why I have WD-40 next to my peppers. WD-40 is an oil. It's a solvent or insolvent. So I figure I can use this, not in my mouth, don't use this in your mouth, unless you really like the taste of WD-40. Lubricated. I figure I can use this to dissolve the capsaicin out of my skin. We'll see if that works. I will put the results of that, I think, in the description because I will not know if this worked or not for a couple hours. I also need to change the battery in the camera, so that gives me a chance to go try to wash all this greasy stuff off my hands. However, I have to figure out a way to turn off the camera before I do that, so this will be interesting. Okay, the pickles, which are not yet pickles, are now in their respective jars. I have non-spicy, which has just a little bit of onion to add flavor, and somewhat spicy, which has a few hot peppers, but not too many. I ended up adding about 3 habaneros, maybe a half a jalapeno, and like 4 or 5 serranos per each one, so it'll be mild at best. Now comes the part where I start adding spices. It is important to remember that these, if you pickled them right now, would taste slightly like onion. A big part of what goes into a pickle is the spices that you put in the jar with it. So I've got scoops of varying sizes, and the first one we need to add is salt. Salt. I don't want to put it somewhere wet. Let's see, what is this? I know some people use kosher salt, which is expensive. This is ordinary Morton iodized salt. You may ask, why iodized? All the salt I use, every bit of salt, is always iodized. What is the iodine for? Does it give it flavor? No, it probably shouldn't have touched my eye after touching all those hot peppers, but oh well. Iodine is added to salt for the simple reason of the fact that iodine is a critical nutrient in the function of the human thyroid. The thyroid hormone that the thyroid gland, which is located about here, produces, has 4 iodine atoms in it. It needs that to work. Your thyroid will not work without iodine. If you do not receive iodine, it results in goiter. So I eat this to avoid goiter. Actually, goiter is, if an adult does not get iodine, they get goiter, which is a massive, grotesque swelling on the neck. If you do not get iodine since birth, you get cretinism, which sounds insulting, but it's a real disease, which is basically poor development, physically and mentally, due to iodine deficiency. It's a big deal. So why they made this was to fix that, because potassium iodide, which I believe is potassium iodide, let's see, salt, calcium sulfate, dextrose, potassium iodide, is added to this because it easily stores in salt and it tastes like salt. So it's actually very, very little in here. It was put in there because iodine is produced in the ocean, or not produced, it concentrates in the ocean because iodine, as sodium and potassium iodide, is a salt. So the ocean's full of it. It comes out of the ocean as ocean spray, ends up in the atmosphere, and goes out. And on rain, the rain comes down, lands on the land. Vegetables grown near the ocean, comparatively, have usable concentrations of iodine. So if you live relatively close to the ocean, within probably a few hundred miles, you're fine. The problem gets to be when you live very, very inland, or especially up on top of or behind mountain ranges, where the water percolates out, it falls out, the iodine gets all absorbed before it gets to you. Your crops don't have iodine. It doesn't affect the crops don't care. But you get sick. That's why you usually see it in, the highest rates of this historically have been like central US, I think, in America, but it was really common in like the Alps in like the 1800s, and is still common in some parts of the world in mountainous regions. I think, not to insult Pakistan, but I think Pakistan actually does have a problem with iodine deficiency in some of the more rural areas. So they add it to salt, because everybody could buy salt, so you get the salt, you send it out to everybody gets iodine. So I use this to prevent cretinism. Salt is an important ingredient in pickling, to the extent that you can actually pickle in pure brine without vinegar. That's how sauerkraut is made, which I'll cover a little bit of the more science of that in a second. So I'm adding a tibispa, TBS. Don't know entirely what that is. For people who live outside the United States, they may not be fully aware of the fact that we use this weird, like, sub-measurements of tablespoons and teaspoons to actually, if you've ever seen a recipe from America, it's always in, well, they probably use it in other countries. The thing is, though, we don't know what those actually are. Like, that is not taught in schools anymore. So we don't know what the difference between a tablespoon and a teaspoon is. So I don't know if this is a teaspoon or a tablespoon. America, young people under the age of probably like 40 mostly know the metric system for everything except length and like room temperature. Like atmospheric temperatures and length we don't know, but all volumes and measurements like cups and tablespoons and teaspoons, we don't know any of that. We use metric. The next thing I want to add after the salt is Dill. Now, dill is a fundamental ingredient in pickles, hence dill pickles. It imparts a unique flavor onto them. The ideal source of dill is fresh. I don't have fresh dill. So here's a consideration of dill, in that dill comes, well, dried processed dill comes in two forms. You've got dill seed and dill weed. Although they sound similar, they're very different. You can see this is a kind of freeze-dried green powder, whereas this is actually a number of small seeds. Both have different flavor properties. There's an impediment on my dill weed. Okay. So that tastes sort of spicy, slightly herbal. Whereas these actually smell kind of like pickles, almost, deep, aromatic, almost chemical. In pickles, the usual source of dill is dill seed. I'm adding dill weed as a bonus, but it's not actually in most pickles, just dill seeds. These are expensive. Not hugely expensive, I mean we're not buying nutmeg here. But they are relatively costly. Fortunately, I don't use them in normal cooking, so I really only use them for growing dill and this application. So how much of this do I want to add? Let's go with a tisp. I mean, why not keep, that's probably too much. Yeah, we did a tibs of salt. We'll do a tisp of seeds. Wipe that off. Now I add the dill weeds. Dill weed is comparatively cheap compared to the seeds, and it is best used fresh if you can get it. Dried is usable, but not as good as fresh, to be totally honest, in terms of aromatic potency. The next ingredient I would like to add is powdered garlic. You notice I get the glass vial ones because I like drinking out of the vials. Not when they're full of spicy stuff, when they're full of, probably vodka. I might have to get more of this. I have another one of these. I use a ton of this because I really like tomato-based products, and garlic goes great with everything. So I like one tisp. I like keeping everything the same amount. Makes it easy. Maybe that's too much garlic, you say? Maybe you should use sparingly? I say no. People say you can overdo garlic. I don't know if I believe it. The next one, I'm switching down for this black pepper, considering the high cost of black pepper. Spicy. Black pepper is actually one of the tropical spices. You'll notice the dill weed and garlic, that's stuff that grows around here. This only grows in tropical places, so it's super expensive. Not really. I mean, it's really common. I'm only going to use a half tisp on each of these, including same goes for paprika. What is paprika? Actually, that's weird because a lot of people don't know what paprika is. Paprika is actually ground pepper, red pepper, like what these habaneros and stuff. Came from the same similar species of plant. Actually, same genus, different species. Paprika is just a different type of capsaicin pepper. I do not actually know if paprika is spicy. Come on, paprika. Okay. It's not spicy, but it tastes like it should be. Okay. Interesting discovery I've just made. Paprika, if you eat it plain, tastes exactly like a habanero without the spicy. It's freaky. This is that flavor. So that's apparently what that flavor is. I've made a connection I did not know. Paprika is the taste of habaneros. It's weirdly, it's freaky because when you eat it, you think, oh, this is going to be real bad, this is going to be real bad, it's going to be spicy, and it's like, no. It's like somebody took all the spice out. Is this other one, chili powder. Now, chili powder is a ground red chili. It's very dark in color. It's not hugely spicy, but it tastes like mole, which should not be surprising. That's what mole is made out of, chili powder and chocolate. Ooh, it actually smells like graham crackers. I don't know if this is... Yeah, this is chili pepper, spices. Okay, so it does not say anything on it other than chili powder. Probably shouldn't have snorted it. Okay. My sinus is cleared out, though. I think this is mole chili. I think they put chocolate in here. Which they really should say, but that's what the secret ingredient that makes it so dark is. And then none of it in the non-spicy ones. So those will still have a little bit of a reddish color because the paprika is that nice orange color. But it won't really be hot because paprika is not hot. It's not hugely hot. So this is a part where it gets a little scientifically interesting. Say, well, why do you add vinegar to pickles? Because that's what a pickle is. A pickle is a fruit or vegetable that has been soaked in acid. The acid, excuse me, but also peppers. Acid in the form of vinegar is pretty easy to make. I think these are probably chemically produced from byproducts of industrial stuff, but often, historically, it was produced by taking a fermented substance, often that had gone bad, and just putting in the necessary ingredients to convert alcohol into vinegar. So in other words, taking a wine or a cider that you had extra of or that went off and just turning it over into an acid. This is distilled white vinegar, so it's actually processed to remove all flavor except for the acetic acid, which is what's in here. Why vinegar, though? Okay, that's the scientific interesting aspect. In an enclosed environment like a bottle, can, or jar, the thing you need to be concerned about most in terms of generating toxicity is something called Clostridia. Clostridia is a bacteria, specifically a highly aggressive anaerobic bacteria. Anaerobic meaning it grows without oxygen. It's not usually present on surfaces because it can't live in oxygen. It does not have the metabolic activities and abilities to detoxify oxygen. Oxygen is actually exceedingly toxic to life. We have enzymes and mitochondria that can help us deal with oxygen and actually utilize it, but a lot of bacterial species don't. They just never really evolved that system. They live in environments on the earth where there's no oxygen. However, Clostridial spores are very durable. They're not really actively alive, but they can germinate into bacteria, and they're present everywhere. They're probably present on these fruits, on me, on the walls, in the air. There's always a risk of Clostridia being somewhere, especially in anything that has contact with soil, which is what these plants grew in. Clostridia, when put in an environment with no air, grows limitlessly. And when it does that, it can produce several proteinaceous toxins, botulinum toxin, which is an extremely potent toxin that is in fact highly illegal to own. You cannot purify and concentrate that in any way. It is a chemical select agent. The government will come on down to you like a sack of bricks full of lead hammers. Like they cast the hammer of lead inside a brick, vitrified it, and whacked you over the head with it. If you put Clostridial spores in this and seal it, and this was just, say, water, there's enough food in there for the Clostridia to grow, it'll continue, and then it will start consuming the food and generating botulinum toxin, causing botulism. Botulism is usually identified in homemade canned goods that have swollen. Like, that's when they say don't buy a damaged can. Everyone's like, oh, it's dented. Dented is not what botulism looks like. What botulism looks like is a can that looks like it's about to explode. Why? Because the botulism, the Clostridium, is growing and producing gas. Really smelly, gross gas. It's causing the can to expand. If you were to eat that, there's so much toxin that you would die. Well, you may not die, but it paralyzes your respiratory system and you get very sick. The idea is to not get botulism inside your pickles. How is that done? Most people use sterility, but I say, what do I care about sterility? I'm not sterilizing these. People in ancient times didn't sterilize things. There's no need to sterilize it. That would kill the Clostridia, but I'm not going to do it because I have vinegar. And this is probably relying too much on the vinegar, but fundamentally, Clostridia cannot grow under acidic conditions. In other words, vinegar. The only time you really get a Clostridial problem is when the pH is too high. It's too alkaline or neutral. Then Clostridia can grow just fine. 5% acidity vinegar, Clostridia can't grow in this. It just won't. So if this is what I put in there, that's fine. They'll just sort of sit there and percolate in themselves in the acid. To a degree. Because that's the other thing that's kind of interesting, and that probably doesn't happen, so this is dubious what kind of pickles this would happen in, is acid fermentation, which is a good thing. So don't get me wrong on that. That's like what sourdough is. In this context, it's possible that acid-tolerant bacteria exist in the solution, in the vinegar, and ferment the internal ingredients to make them even tastier. My hand is starting to get spicy, and I can kind of feel it. That might happen, but I'm not relying on that happening. It doesn't need to happen here because I can't guarantee that that's what will happen. I mentioned sauerkraut before. Sauerkraut is interesting because it relies entirely on that process. Sauerkraut is not put in vinegar, it's put in brine, which is just salt water, and it's submerged, like a whole cabbage is submerged in brine for just months on end. The flavor of sauerkraut is that bacterial decomposition producing the acid and decaying the sauerkraut in a way that is tasty. Bacteria decaying your food is not necessarily a bad thing. That's just the matter of creating fermented food. Some of it's a more acquired taste, but it is a taste, and it's not toxic. So, I'm going to pour in, let's see. It smells like vinegar. You know what? I've used that vinegar previously for science. I don't know what's in it. So I'm going to open up an all-new vinegar. Food-grade vinegar, not cleaning vinegar. It's a great value, it says so on the side. And that's literally all there is to pickles, is putting vegetables and spices inside vinegar. Now I'm going to top the vinegar off later, and I'll explain why I do that. So I put enough vinegar in to cover most of the ingredients. You say, why not fill it up all the way? One, I'm kind of running low on vinegar, and I will have to break into the science vinegar. But the reason I'm doing that is for the sake of the caps. With canning, now it's probably a good advice to not take my advice on cannings. I'm a schmuck, not a canner. So these are actually done very wrong, and I'm relying on my scientific knowledge to keep me safe, because I can do that. The cans that these utilize these two-part lids, so that is a lid, and it has this housing, so you would drop it on, and then you would drop that around it, and seal it up that way. Now, in order to get a good seal on these, because this is actually waxed on the edge, technically speaking, this should all be sterile, but it's not going to be. I'm going to microwave these for a good few minutes, probably like 2 minutes each, which is going to take a while. You don't need to watch me doing that. That way the material inside is hot. What do hot materials do? They expand. So it expands. I top it off exactly to the top with vinegar, put the lid on, I'll probably hydrogen peroxide off the lid or whatever, and then put it on, close it, seal it real tight, so that when it cools and contracts, it produces a pressure vacuum and pulls the cap down. So that'll get pulled down. So you can tell when the pickles are fresh, because if there's botulism, it will unpop itself, and it'll make sure they are perfectly airtight. So I'm going to go do that and come back with fully sealed proto-pickles. And there you go. The pickles have been pickled, or more accurately, they are now in the process of pickling, which is a phase when the vinegar percolates into the tissues of the pickles and the onions and the small cabbages, and percolates out of all the seeds and spices and produces the actual pickle. I don't know how long that actually takes. Probably a couple months, at least. During that time, I'm going to keep an eye on them, make sure that none of them swell up. If they start to get a lot of pressure, if they start to fizz, then they're probably not good. Otherwise, I don't expect to have any problems. I will have to test them at some point in the distant future before I give them to anybody to make sure there isn't any poison. I'm more resistant to poison than most people because I'm extremely large in a body fat sense. So the LD50 is a little different for me. So, pickles. And that's all I've got for pickle making. I can't eat them until they're done. So, extra.